Welcome to Module 4, Part 2. We're going to go through a full technical SEO checklist. Now again, if you didn't watch the previous video, please go back and do this, because otherwise this really isn't going to make any sense, because what I'm about to show you in the next second is pretty much insane. So let me show you what it is. I went through a checklist that we do internally, some other tools and everything like that, and I just put together a whole bunch of things that you may want to look at. Now, this is by no means a full list of everything, because frankly it wouldn't fit on a single slide, but it is quite a decent number of things that you should absolutely look into. Now we're going to go through exactly how to do all of these, what they all mean and everything basically in this video. So let's go quick, because this is probably going to take far too long, right? So starting off, obviously, what tools are we going to use? We're going to use Screaming Frog, we mentioned this previously, or some sort of crawling tool like Sitemap, Deep Crawl, or any others like that. And that basically allows us to crawl the website and identify different issues on the website. We're also going to use Google Search Console, which also allows us to access similar data to that, but also allows us to access things on top of that, like how exactly they're crawling and indexing our website, essentially. We're also, on top of this, I didn't write in here, going to use our brain, and we're going to open up our browser, we're going to open up the site, we're going to go through it, I'm going to manually kind of inspect some elements and learn what issues are on the site manually. Also, it's not all through automation, not all through tools. Now, how I've broken down this video is into 3 sections. It's going to be number 1, how to do things with Screaming Frog, and number 2, how to do things with Google Search Console, and number 3, how to do things manually by opening up the website. So let's dive into Screaming Frog firstly. What exactly can we do with Screaming Frog? Well, starting off with Screaming Frog, here are a number of things that you can check with Screaming Frog. Now, I will iterate here that some of these other things can also be checked with Screaming Frog. This is just what I would personally recommend using, or what at least I personally use anyway, as more of a preference than anything else. Some other things you can absolutely also check with Screaming Frog also, but something, say, directory structure, while you have a list of all the URLs within Screaming Frog, I prefer just to open up the website manually, click through it, and just get an idea for what's going on there manually, okay? It's not to say you can't find these things in Screaming Frog, I just prefer not to, okay? So go through these one at a time, and again, I'll try to be quick. Number 1 is Orphan Pages. If you don't know what Orphan Pages is, basically a page that doesn't have any internal links to it. And if you don't know what internal link is, go back and watch my previous video, because I explained that already, okay? So if a page has no internal links to it, it's unlikely to rank for anything, because again, links are a huge part of SEO. And it's also much more difficult to identify and find the page for a crawler, because there's no links to it, okay? So how exactly do you find a list of Orphan Pages? You have a couple options within Screaming Frog. Number 1 is if you import a sitemap also, then you can also just find literally orphan URLs literally right here. Currently, obviously, I'm not using that. Normally, what I would personally do is I'm going to export all of this data into a spreadsheet, and then basically you just find all pages that have 0 inlinks, and that is your Orphan Pages. Again, presuming they're valid pages, not 404 pages, missing pages, anything like that. Next up is broken links. Broken links are basically where you link to the wrong URL or a page that's now deleted or anything like that. Again, this will slow down crawling of your website, and it's just not something you really want. So how exactly do you find this list? You open up Screaming Frog, you can go into, say, client error 4xx and see a list of links to these pages. You can also do similar stuff for links to redirects by clicking redirection, and so on and so forth. But basically, here is a list of links here. At the bottom here, I've selected all the ones with links that are 404 pages or 4xx pages, and there's a list of links inside of Screaming Frog to export and then change, remove. You also have 404 pages, which, as most people know, are just missing pages. And again, that's going to slow down the crawler, because you send it to a page and the page is, well, missing, right? So how exactly do you find that? Pretty much as we did before. Rather than looking at the links here, you just literally look at the list, right? So click for 4xx error. Here's a list of pages or other things that are basically 404 errors, and that's it, done. Next up is broken redirects, which is basically where a redirect, as in a page is set to redirect, but it redirects to a page that doesn't exist or has issues of some kind, right? Now again, this is very, very easy to resolve. You open up Screaming Frog, you go into redirects list, and you basically do a little bit of manual work, and you just double check, hey, are these redirects actually valid? It's pretty simple to do this, but I just recommend actually just double checking it manually. You can also, of course, see the actual redirect URL if you want to double check it that way. You can kind of automate it a little bit, but still, I'd probably recommend checking these manually just to double check that it's redirecting also to the correct page. But if you want to, you can basically automate this by seeing the page where it's linked to, and obviously checking if any of them are 404 errors or anything just like that. You also have redirect chains, where a page redirects to another page, which redirects to another page, which redirects to another page. And this is, again, inefficient from a crawl budget perspective. You'd rather just redirect page A to the end page rather than in, again, a chain. So how exactly do you find that? Exactly as we did before, you open up the list of 301 redirects and you just, again, check these URLs. You can do this again manually, or you can do this by looking up which URLs in this list and then seeing if this URL is also in this list again, being redirected. Very, very simple. Next, there is high page depth, which is basically the number of links it takes from starting, which is usually our homepage, to get to this page. Now again, this is not useful for crawl budget because to get to, say, page 5 here, you have to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, and finally then get to 5. You'd prefer if page 5 was in, say, 2 or 3 clicks, ideally, just to make it much, much more efficient from both users and also search engines. Now, how exactly do you find this? This one's actually really easy because in Screaming Frog, you'll see this crawl depth thing right here, and basically that's a list of the crawl depth. So you scroll right down to the bottom here, you can see some of these are a depth of 9, 8, and so on. So that is your high depth pages. Next up, there is thin content pages, which are just pages with very little content on them that really aren't going to rank for anything. A classic example is your tag pages, as you can see in this screenshot right here. Now, how do you check this? Well, in 2 ways. Number 1 is you go into Screaming Frog again and you look for low content pages. But in many cases, that won't really work, or it really misses out a lot of things. So here's what you do, and it's a little bit more manual. Scroll right up to the top and click internal HTML. And obviously, you just want to go through this list basically manually at this point and go through them and just verify by knowing your site or knowing your client site, and just look through any of these low quality or low, like, thin content pages basically, where there's just no real content on them. It's like an automated page or something that really shouldn't exist because it's not going to rank for anything. So this is really a kind of a manual process, but I basically just go through all these and just look for any that don't make sense. And obviously you get used to patterns after a while. So /collections is a category page, /products is a product page. So we're kind of skipping over them. We're just looking for things like tags and things like that, which are probably in here somewhere, but I'm not seeing any right now. But that's basically what it is. You just manually go through and identify additional thin content, low quality pages. You also have Hreflang Tags, which is for basically multi-country, multi-language websites, and you just want to make sure this is all set up again correctly. You can find that in Screaming Frog by looking for the Hreflang section, and it says contains it, non-200, unlinked, and so on. So it's going to give you a whole list of these things to look into. It's very, very simple. Again, you probably won't be looking at this unless you're actually a pretty competent technical SEO, because it's a little bit of a complicated setup to use Hreflang anyway. Next up, we want to check the canonicalized pages. Now, this isn't particularly an issue. It's something that we absolutely do want to check. And if you forgot already, a canonicalized page is basically a page that contains a canonical pointing to another page, which basically says, hey, this isn't the original page. The original page is over here. It resolves duplicate content issues. Now, for finding these, you're just going into Screaming Frog and click canonicalized. It's very simple. You can also see other things like all canonicals. You want to check them. But I'm going to check canonicalized here just to double check. You can also see missing others. And I want to see if there's any in here that really shouldn't be canonicalized. Now, I can see already this one here, I see Women's Essentials, page equals 2. This is canonicalized. So it's canonicalized to the Women's Essentials thing. Now, realistically, it's not a good idea. And it's not a good idea for one simple reason, that they actually should have their pagination crawl. This is pagination, which means that they have, say, 20 products on the first page, 20 on the next page, 20 on the next page, and so on. If they're canonicalizing it, then they're saying all of these are the same page, and they're not, because they have a unique list of products. It is not the correct approach for pagination. So this is something that I would absolutely recommend if this was my client to change. The rest of this overall looks good. This is all just like /collections /products, a typical Shopify issue. I wouldn't use this structure at all, but it's okay as it is. Tagged is canonicalized. I probably just no index it, but that's okay. Tags, but overall this looks pretty good. Essentially just looking through this list manually and deciding if any of these need changed. By the way, quick interruption of this video. 2 things, right? Number 1, if you haven't already, please do me a favor, you're enjoying this, click the like button. Absolutely helps out the channel, absolutely helps out getting new people finding these videos. Secondly, if you're unsure, okay, I'm showing you how to find these issues, but how exactly do you resolve these issues? Go back and watch the previous video, because I explained exactly that. This video is more so about what exactly to to look for and what exactly it means. But if you don't know how exactly to resolve that, then it's basically the same thing every time, which comes down to reducing the overall low quality pages on the website, which the previous video explains exactly how to do. So go back and watch that again if you haven't already. Now back to the presentation. Another issue you want to look out for is duplicate content. Duplicate content is when you have two identical pages, which obviously is usually some sort of manual or automated error. Now you can find this very, very quickly with Screaming Frog by doing this. Again, go to exact duplicates. But I'd also recommend, again, looking through the actual list, because sometimes you have pages that aren't exact duplicates, but they're very, very near duplicates. And obviously, Screaming Frog can check for this if you enable it. I usually don't. Instead, I'm, again, looking through all the pages manually on top of this, and just double checking if any of these are, again, duplicates. It's pretty clear when that comes up. Another thing you want to look out for is your H1 issues. Usually this is going to be like the missing completely off the page. There's more than one on the page, or they're duplicated across several pages, usually because there's some sort of automated page creation type issue going on there. Now again, you can find these very, very easily with Screaming Frog. We talked about this previously, but real quick, you see under the H1 section, you have all, but then you have missing. So these pages are missing H1s. Probably doesn't matter. It's a privacy policy. You also have duplicate. So these are a list of pages that have the same H1 across all of them. Then you also have multiple and over 70 characters that you'll probably cover the over 70 characters one anyway when you're optimizing them properly in the on-page process. Another place where you want to look, but doesn't necessarily mean there's an issue, is your NoIndex pages. NoIndex pages are where you tell search engines, hey, you don't want this added to the search engine. Now you may well want to use this, and I absolutely recommend it. Again, that's really what we covered in the previous video, when to use this for reducing the overall pages on the site. But you just want to double check this list and make sure nothing's been accidentally thrown in there. I've even seen cases where someone's accidentally no-indexed the homepage or the entire site. It's just something you absolutely want to check. Now you locate that, again, in Screaming Frog by going under the directive section and going to no index. Currently, obviously, for this website right now, there are 0, but it's something you absolutely do want to check. Similar to that, you may want to check for NoFollow pages. Basically, you can have a page that is no index and you tell search engines, hey, don't index this, don't add this to your search engine, but you can also say like follow or don't follow the links on that page. And there may well be a page where you don't want to add it to the search engine, but it has links pointing out from that you absolutely do want followed, which is usually more often than not. So I'd recommend double checking, again, Screaming Frog, no follow here, just double checking that you actually want links on that page no followed and you don't want them crawled, basically. I'd probably not recommend doing that in most cases, but there are certain cases absolutely where you may want to have them no followed also. Next up, we have page speed or slow loading websites. Now you can do additional things inside of Screaming Frog with this, but actually I usually probably won't. What I would recommend though is looking out for big images, because that's going to really slow down a page massively, and it's a very, very simple fix. Okay, so here's what you do. You go into Screaming Frog, under the images section, they have this over 100 kilobytes. Now you can change the setting if you like, but this is just a quick indicator to look at. You can also filter this and do the opposite. Say, this image right here is 4.7 megabytes, right? All of these here are over a megabyte. It's too big. It is just frankly too big. So that's the first starting point, to look at these images and see exactly if you can kind of shrink the image down, compress it and other things to just reduce the overall size of that file, which will massively speed up the website. If you imagine trying to load a page and you have to load 4.7 megabytes of images, basically, that's just one image to get the page to load, it's too much. Another potential issue you want to look out for is non-indexable pages being added to your sitemap. So if you follow the instructions here, you'll find some pages that you want to say no index or canonicalized, again, to reduce the low quality number of pages on your website. But what happens is, if you keep that in the sitemap, then it's conflicting, right? Because in one way you're saying, hey, don't add this to your search engine, and another way you're saying, hey, here's a list of all the pages that I want added to the search engine, right? It can be a little bit conflicting, right? So you realistically, if you no index or canonicalize a page or anything like that, then you also want to remove it from the sitemap. Now, starting off with the absolute basics, of course, is what is a sitemap? Where do you find that? Well, I'm specifically referring here to a XML sitemap, which you can usually find by opening up the site and going to the website.com or whatever /sitemap.xml. Here's an example of one for this PC Fitness Shopify store. And what you see here is they actually have multiple sitemaps. So this is the main sitemap with links to all the other ones. If I go ahead and grab this, let's say pages here, go grab this, paste this in here, And this is a list of all the pages on the store. You also have a sitemap for collections and products and so on, right? This is multiple sitemaps, but that's basically what a sitemap is. It's just a list of all the pages that they want indexed and picked up and everything, basically. Now go to Screaming Frog. If you collect this data in Screaming Frog, again, I don't have this because I don't do it. I do it in a spreadsheet after the fact. But if you do, then you can basically enable crawl in sitemaps, and then you can check this non-indexable URLs in sitemap, and it'll give you a list of all pages that are canonicalized or no index, i.e. non-indexable, that are currently in the sitemap that you should absolutely remove from your sitemap. Very, very simple. Moving on, then next up is Google Search Console, and how exactly we can find some different issues in Google Search Console, or potential issues anyway to look into. So what I recommend using Google Search Console for is zero traffic pages, as in pages actually not even traffic, I prefer impressions actually. Zero impressions pages, we'll get into what that means in a moment. Slow loading pages is another way you can find these. Structured data testing, you want to just double check that there's no structured data issues here, and then coverage issues altogether, and altogether how they crawl on your website. So let's go into a few of these, starting off with the easy one, slow loading. If your site is loading really slow, there's a number of things you could do to fix that, which I won't really cover in this video because there's frankly too much, but just a few common ideas for you, which is get faster hosting. That's the easy one if that's in your control. You're not using something like Shopify or whatever. Use a CDN, that's a content delivery network, which basically delivers files, images, JavaScript, CSS files, things like that in a location or server nearer to the user that's visiting, so it should load faster theoretically, and presuming of course their servers are also faster for delivering that type of media. You also want to use a faster DNS. DNS is you have name servers. You have like ns1.example.com, right? That is a name server, and wherever this is hosted influences obviously speed as well to like first load up the page. So something that's very, very important for speed. I recommend using a quick one like Cloudflare, Amazon, or something like that. That's just quick and not some crappy cheap web hosting one. It will absolutely make a difference there. You also can use lazy loading. Lazy loading is where basically you hold back images loading until the user scrolls down to that section of the page. So for example, if you have a big page like this and you have images down here, well, they don't actually see this when they load the page. So let's load this as they get nearer to that section of the website rather than loading all immediately up front. It just, again, saves resources and loads quicker because you only need to load this little bit here. You can load the rest of it later as they start scrolling down, okay? You also want to reduce images ideally. What does that mean? It means that you want to, again, if an image is really big and it's only showing this size, but it's really big, then just crop it down so it's actually the size that it's showing. Beyond that, you can compress the images, run it through some sort of compression fin, which basically just reduces the overall quality of the site in very, very minute, barely noticeable ways. But as a result of that, it massively sometimes reduces the image size by, say, like 70, 80%. It looks practically the same. I can't tell the difference, but the file size is 70% smaller. It's absolutely worth doing that. You can also reduce resources in general. So what does that mean? It means if you have all these different plugins and different stuff like that and add-ons, and it's all adding all these different JavaScript files, every single one needs to be loaded. Every single one needs to be loaded on a different server, basically. So you have to connect to the server, then download the file. It's just slow, okay? So if you can reduce anything, you can reduce, like on Shopify, all the old add-ons and stuff, they still leave all the files there when you delete the add-on. So go through and check if there's any old files, anything to be loaded up from old add-ons not even use anymore, and just delete them. But essentially the idea is if you can reduce the resources being loaded, obviously it will speed up the website. Similar to that, you can also merge resources, so it's a single file being loaded rather than different ones. Again, if this is happening where you're connecting to 5 different servers to load 5 different like JavaScript files and stuff like that, it's much, much quicker to load a single server and one file with all the information in it. Again, presuming it's not super bloated with too much crap in there. So it's just merging resources. Again, this is pretty technical stuff, and realistically, as my next point is, if you don't know what any of this stuff is and you're not very technical, just go pay someone to do this. There's page speed optimization services. It's way easier than trying to figure out all this stuff and do it yourself. It's just easier. Now, for identifying specific slow loading pages, you can do this inside of Google Search Console using their Core Web Vitals tool. You see here, and here you see here issues with LCP issue here. You can see here 2.5 seconds on mobile, and for some of them in the past, longer than 4 seconds. So this is, again, particularly slow loading pages that you can absolutely look into. You can click through to this and get a whole list of 429 URLs in this case. Obviously, this is just need improvement. It's not an error, but it is something that you can look into to find that list. Beyond that, you can also go ahead and use Google's Page Speed Insights tool, and I can have my editor go and do that for you guys, and you can watch exactly how that looks. That's going to give you a ton of insights into what your score is on mobile and desktop, but also a ton of insights into what exactly they recommend changing to improve the overall speed of your website, or again, just pay some expert to do that for you. Another thing I like to look into is zero impression pages. If you go into Google Search Console, you can see there's a list of basically the clicks and the list of impressions for each page. And obviously these ones here are 1. But beyond that, there's also a list of pages that you have in your sitemap, that you have in your crawl, that if you check here, they're not in this list whatsoever, which means they have 0. They have no impressions whatsoever. Now, is that an issue? Not particularly, but it probably means that it's either not well set up for SEO, or it's just not a good page whatsoever for getting any sort of organic traffic from. So what I like to do personally is I like to look through that list. In some cases, we'll literally find like 2,000 of them. And I like to look at them, okay, and determine, should we keep this page and optimize it better because it's just not optimized well? Or should we do something with this page like canonicalize it, no index, or even just delete the page altogether and again, reduce the overall wasted crawl budget on these pages that are low quality from an SEO perspective because they have 0 impressions. Another thing to look into is your coverage and crawl report. I mentioned these in the previous video, so my editor can just show the previous videos in a second. But basically, you just want to check the coverage for other issues that you missed in the crawl, and it's just another check for, it's going to tell you like 4 or 4 pages, things like that. And in the crawl report, just for consistency. You're looking for consistency here. If it's dropping over time, then that's a bad thing. If it's like spiking, it could potentially be a bad thing. It's just things to look into basically. So checking the crawl report and the coverage report, here's how to do that. Right, so we can go into the coverage here and you can see if there's any errors, if there's any valid with warnings, and obviously a number of valid. And we can also scroll through these and see, okay, here's the warning, right? So there's pages that are indexed, but they're blocked from Robots.txt, right? Or there's some errors here. In this case, there's none. But you can see here, like, submitted URL seems to be a 404 and different things like that. So Google Search Console is a very, very powerful tool for understanding really how Google are crawling your website, and then why that is the case, and identifying is there issues with like 404 pages or pages being blocked by robots and things like that, which we're going to get into in this video. I just want to explain roughly what Google Search Console can be used for, and really just a very, very beginner level introduction to looking at this data, which is basically just looking at it from a consistency standpoint. There's no wrong or right amount, though you certainly want to consider if it's really, really low, you have a big site, that's probably an issue, but generally speaking, you're just looking for consistency. In this case, this client has thousands of pages, so while you're seeing this 5,000 crawl requests in a day, your site may have significantly less if it's a much smaller site, or it may have significantly more. It depends on, again, the site size, the site authority, and various different factors. The thing you want to look for, again, is just consistency. You also want to check for structured data issues. Structured data, as I mentioned previously, is basically just making sense of the code and the content on your page. So you can tell them, hey, this thing here is a breadcrumb. This thing here is a product, and here's the price, here's the name, here's the stock level, things like that. Just making sense of this information on your page so they can read it in a uniform way that's always the same every single time. Now, if you open up Google Search Console, you'll see them down here. We can see breadcrumbs, products, site link, search box, and unpassable structured data. These are all structured data elements. So I'm on breadcrumbs right now. You can see here, you have a list of errors, valid warnings, valid, and so on. And here we had some errors, no errors in the past. Let's try another one. Let's do products here. And you see here for products, there is valid with warning. So here's some ones where, hey, they're missing aggregate rating, reviews, and things like that. I even missing description on a few products, probably because there's just literally no description for the product, but it's potential things to look into. All this can be found inside of, again, Google Search Console, which makes it, again, easier because they just give you a list rather than trying to manually go through anything crazy like that. And the final section for this video is manual and other tools that you use to check for things, usually just spreadsheet or inspect element or something like that. Here's a few things that I like to look at for doing that. There's keyword cannibalization, robots.txt, slow loading, directory structure, and the others here. Let's go into them again, making this as quickly as I possibly can. First up is keyword cannibalization. Keyword cannibalization, in short, is when you have more than one page attempting to rank for the same keyword. That's all it is. When you have this, what's going to happen is something like what you're seeing here with this little chart here. Every single line here with a different color represents a different page. And what you're seeing is this page is ranking, and then it drops down, then the next page comes up, and then it's like, oh, so it's doing okay. Then it drops down, the next page comes up, and then it drops down, the next page comes up, and it drops down, and so on. And it's just kind of inconsistent rankings where it's just kind of jumping between different pages, or sometimes two pages ranking at the same time. It just looks messy, and it's also less controllable because if you have two pages that are very, very similar, the same intent, everything like that, Well, how do you control which one ranks? You can't, because there's two similar pages. It's just not a good position to be in. What you want to do in this case is you want to like merge the pages, you want to like de-optimize one or reduce keywords on that page, or you want to like canonicalize one so you have a canonical tag on it pointing to the other one, or different actions like that. But basically you want to do something to make sure there's only one page focused on this keyword for that specific intent, right? Now, how exactly do you check for this? Well, you can actually do this with Google Search Console that we went into previously. How I like to do this is I like to use Ahrefs. And now what you're looking at right here is a tool that Ahrefs provides that's basically a spreadsheet that you can import the data into from Ahrefs, a list of the organic keywords, and it finds any keywords that you rank in for more than one URL with. So these examples here, the first one, data validation Google Sheets, they have actually there's both the same URL by the looks of it, but the next one, dead link 404, you see they have a broken link checker page, and then you have a blog broken link building guide, okay? So you see they have two pages ranking for the same thing. This is basically keyword cannibalization, and this tool finds them within a few seconds just by importing that data. Now, I personally like to do things again a little bit differently, and I like to look at not only current rankings, but also the history of rankings, so the past 3 months or 6 months, and just double check, has it changed in the last 6 months? Because while one page may be ranking currently, it could be a different scenario where last week or last month a different page is ranking and it's still changing, it's just not actively showing more than one page at a single time. So that's just how I do it, but this works also, and I'll include a link to their sheet as well because it's a nice easy starting point for getting started with finding keyword cannibalization issues. Next up is your Robots.txt file, which basically tells robots how to interact with your website. You can allow certain pages, you can disallow certain pages, and different things like that. We mentioned this again previously in the last video, where we talked about, okay, maybe you don't want a NoIndex page, maybe you just want to block search engines accessing this completely if there's no links and nothing useful on it. For example, your wish list, your shopping cart, your registration page, and different things like that. As you can see here, this is a classic example right now you're looking at from Shopify. Now, this can be accessed for absolutely any website by typing in the website address followed by robots.txt, as you can see here in the URL here. And this is, again, a default one for Shopify. Then, unfortunately, if you're using Shopify, they do not allow you to customize it, which kind of sucks. But you can see basically what they're doing here. They're disallowing robots by accessing /a/downloads, /admin, /cart, /orders, checkout, and other various different things like that, where it makes sense. There's nothing really useful there. Another interesting tidbit for you Shopify users there is that they automatically block robots by accessing anything with a plus in it. So if you name in your tags or vendors or anything with a plus in it, they're automatically blocked by Robots.txt, which is a good use of crawl budget, but probably not something I deliberately do as a technique, but it is a good way of kind of saving crawl budget on those pages which you don't want indexed anyway. Now anyway, what would I recommend doing here is I'd honestly just recommend checking it and just making sure that firstly it's being used correctly, so that it's actually being used, number one. That means, so again, it's here and you're blocking things like the cart and registration to pages that shouldn't be indexable at all, and it just saves resources again by not being indexable at all. There's no links on there that matter, so again, block it at a robots.txt level. And then secondly, double check that there's no errors in here, there's no mistakes, there's nothing like, hey, this is being blocked and it absolutely shouldn't be blocked. Just verify that it's actually set up correctly. It's going to save you some headaches if you just can't get a page picked up. Maybe your robots.txt is blocking it. Oh, and don't forget to do this for subdomains also, not only the root domain, but if you have a subdomain on your site, then make sure to do that for all the subdomains also. Another place where there's often mistakes is in faceted navigation. This is basically the filter navigation on the sidebar of your e-commerce store. You're going to see this pretty much on Amazon or any big retailer sites that have a lot of products, right? You can see here, this is an example one where they have brands, color, and so on. Now, this is a pretty difficult thing to do SEO for, especially if you're on a platform like Shopify where it's really limited controls of what you can actually do. So here's what you need to do, okay? Number one, if these are actually links, meaning if you actually click this and it takes you to a different page or something like that, an actually indexable page, then you really need to be careful that you don't index all of them, because a lot of these shouldn't really be indexable pages. What I mean by that, maybe you don't need a separate page for black massage chairs, I think this is. You can actually rank for that on the same page. It depends on, again, check the keywords, but you may not want to have separate pages for this. And when you have different filters for sizes, colors, prices, and everything like that, suddenly you can have like 50 different automated, thin quality, low quality pages being indexed that really shouldn't be and don't really add any additional value. So it's absolutely something that you need to double check. But on the contrary, you can also be setting filters that you may necessarily want to keep and may actually be something that you want to rank. It depends. Now, if you're using Shopify, here's what I recommend. You can't rank them because you can't optimize them. So here's what I do. I'd recommend just no following the links. So you're reducing any wasted link juice, for a lack of a better term, going to these filters and everything like that. And then obviously you go ahead and make sure all these filters, i.e. tags on Shopify, are no index because you can't really do anything with them. But again, it depends on the platform, but this is something that's a little bit more nuanced. You want to check this manually. You want to go into it and check if the links are no followed, if they're indexable, anything like that, and really look into this manually because there's a lot that you can potentially screw up here. Another thing to look into manually is your breadcrumbs. Now, breadcrumbs are these little navigational things that you see at the top of most websites where it kind of links you to like the path that you're currently on. So in this case, I clicked on a product and you can see here, it has the main shop link back to that and also the all massage chairs page that I came from to access this page. Now again, this is something that's commonly screwed up in multiple different ways. Number one is they don't have any breadcrumbs whatsoever. Sometimes that can be okay for users if it's just a blog, something that's a very simple site. But for like e-commerce, I'd highly recommend that you have breadcrumbs in place. The other way it can be kind of screwed up is that it doesn't have enough paths in there. So one example you see commonly is that it will just have shop here and then the product name, and it doesn't have the collection that it's part of. This is really not user-friendly and it's not great for search engines neither. What I'd recommend again is adding the necessary paths, whether that's one main category or even adding subcategories in there also to really narrow that down and make it even easier. Another thing I like to check manually is the directory structure. You can see here the directory is basically just the folders in the URL, right? So linezero.com/podcast is a directory. Right? Now, what I would recommend is just double checking the directories and just making sure they make sense and they're not ridiculous, right? So if there's too many directories, then that can be an issue. And just things like that, just making sure that it actually makes sense, the structure that it's in. One common issue we see with directory structures is where they have /podcast, for example, then you have /podcast again, right? We see /dogs, /dog food, /dry dog food, and it is repeating words over and over again in URL. It's a directory structure issue really, and it's something that I absolutely recommend looking into. So just double checking, clicking through different pages on the site and just double checking the directory structure, making sure it's not again ridiculously long and making sure that it's not repeating keywords over and over again. Oh, and on top of that, ideally that you actually have a level of depth also though, because if you have say Shopify, you just have /collection / the name of that collection, it kind of sucks. It's a pretty bad directory structure. Ideally, you can have /category / subcategory. So it just makes it easier to kind of filter within that. If you can't have that, you're on Shopify, suck it up. If you can have that, it's way better to have the category product and then the subcategory within that, and then even the product if you want to have it that way. But it's better to do that than just /category for every single one of your categories, subcategories. So if you click from a category into a subcategory, both of them really should be in the directory structure, but do what you can with that. Another easy thing to check for manually that you can do automated, but I just prefer just to check this manually because it's easy, is checking that the HTTP version of the website redirects to the HTTPS, the www redirects to the non-www or whatever you use, and basically just making sure this is all set up and redirecting correctly. It's crazy the amount of pages that we see or websites we see that don't do this, and it's such an easy thing to do, and it's just something that you absolutely want to check, because if someone goes to your site on the HTTP and it's a separate site, it can be duplicate content, and in certain cases we've seen where sites they don't have this redirect and you actually have an issue, like an error, if you go on without the HTTPS, you just type in HTTP, it gives you an error page or something, which is just insane, okay? So just make sure that it's redirecting correctly. It all redirects into one single form, so it's HTTPS without the www or with whatever you set up. It doesn't make any difference, but just make sure it all redirects into one single standard. Next up, we have pagination. If there's ever a lot of products or pages or blog posts or anything like that, you usually add pagination to just speed up the loading of the page, basically. So rather than having 500 blog posts or 500 products loaded on the page, you just have 20 or 30 or something like that, right? And then at the bottom, you see this little pagination. It will say either next or previous, or it will say something like this where it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, and you select the page number. Now, the correct way of dealing with this isn't by no indexing the paginated pages, and it's not by canonicalizing them. It's simply by adding this little thing here, is link rel equals previous, as in previous, and then href equals, and then page 1, and then link rel next equals, then the next page in the pagination. Very, very simple. You don't need to know index these or anything like that. These should be indexable because you want them to actually follow the links on the pages, and you just add rel equals previous and rel equals next. Very, very simple. Another thing I like to look at pretty manually is URL issues. You can do this again using Screaming Frog and literally scrolling through the list of pages, or you can just click around the site and just get an idea anyway. And I'm just looking for like URL issues. What do I mean by that? I mean things like super long URLs, I mean parameters in URLs, I mean non-optimized, like not keyword optimized URLs, and just different things like that. Like we already covered that in the on-page module, but I just want to again click through the site and just get an idea if it's just not being done correctly. Now, having 1 or 2 pages is fine. I'm just looking for the overall direction. This is why I'm doing it manually, because I just want to click through and just get an idea, is the overall site using optimized URLs correctly, or is it all just a complete utter mess? I just want to get a quick idea of that, and I'm going to do that by just manually clicking through to the website. Another thing I like to do fairly manually is product variants. Now again, this isn't really manual because I do this inside of a spreadsheet, but you can do this firstly manual just by double checking if it's being used whatsoever on the site by going into say some products. So I just open up t-shirts in this example for this site, and then just checking if any of them are canonicalized. If they're not, then well, you know you have an issue on the site that you need to deal with this. If that's the case where you need to do something, here's what I like to do. I like to get a big list of all the product pages on the site, and then I like to look at the product handles basically, and I want to find product handles that are similar. So there's different ways of doing this. One way that we're kind of cheap to do this is we just basically just remove say like 15 characters from the end of the URL, because if it's the same minus those 15 characters, there's a good chance they're variants. But then we do some manual inspection to kind of clean up that list, get a whole list of all the product variants, and then we basically go ahead and decide how exactly to deal with them, which is usually again just canonicalizing it into a single product for every single one of the variants of that product. Very, very simple. It sounds complicated, but essentially, as we covered in the previous video, you don't want to have 4 products that are exactly the same besides the color. You want to have all of them just canonicalized into a single page. Another thing I like to look at, surprisingly manual, is the link architecture. Now, by all means, I would absolutely do a deep dive into Screaming Frog data and pulling out all the internal links and really like looking for all the internal links and making sure they're up to quality and everything like that, right? We're absolutely going to do that. Also for identifying link opportunities. But for the actual link architecture, you can realistically get a pretty good idea just by manually clicking through the pages for a few minutes, right? Because if I click onto, say, this site here, and I go into the men's black hoodies page, you can see here they have these links here for all hoodies, white hoodies, hoodies and sweatshirts sale, hoodies and sweatshirts, gray hoodies, right? These are all internal links. What I can see is they have a very deliberate link architecture or silo structure basically set up for linking between different pages on the site. If you click through more, they probably have the same idea all set up. What can I determine from this? I can determine that they have something in place. Now we can go through this further and identify which pages are missing from this overall setup, but what I like to do personally is I like to just double check this is in place, and if it's not in place, then we can design this for an existing site or a brand new site. We can design this from scratch. So I just like to determine what's there currently and manually before we start diving into the deep analysis of internal links using tools and everything like that. Because if you go through this and none of the blog posts and none of the product categories and everything have internal links, or at least that many deliberately created, then we can see there's no real deliberate link architecture or link structure here. So we can go ahead and design that for the whole entire site. Whereas if it's set up really, really well and someone's already done a deliberate effort to do this, then we know, okay, we can probably just skip this and we can probably just deliberately throw in a few specific links on key pages where you can, again, increase rankings for specific pages or just increase overall topical coverage of that topic, right? Very, very simple. So all in all, guys, that is a ridiculously long video covering all of these different issues, what exactly to look for, and really how exactly to find those issues. And for the most part, again, how exactly to resolve them. Well, again, goes back to the previous video. My editor can pull up that slide that showed it. It's basically, if it's really, really easy, like if it's a 404 page, then redirect it to a page that actually exists. If it's a broken link, then delete the link or fix the link, right? Very, very simple. But if it's something like a product that has 0 impressions, then it's a little bit more nuanced, because maybe you want to keep it, but if you don't want to keep it, then what do? Well, maybe you're going to canonicalize that page or that product, or maybe you're going to like no index it for whatever reason, right? You're going to do some sort of action with that you determine based on really intuition and knowledge of the actual client site, what they're trying to achieve and different things like that, right? And also, of course, you can just go in there, you can just add more content and say, okay, it's not getting any impressions right now, but actually this could be a good page, and you increase the content, you build some internal links to it, you actually do the work. But that's basically covered in the previous video. That's a huge list of things to look into. So hopefully that'll keep you busy. Realistically, there could probably be even more to this, and maybe later I'll create like a more detailed spreadsheet checklist, something like that. But that should do for now, because I think that is absolutely plenty to look into. But the overall point to remember for technical SEO is about reducing friction for the crawler going through your site, basically. So if you have missing pages, things like that, again, that's slowing down the crawler, right? So it's just reducing that friction, whether that's low quality pages that have no search value, so you're wasting, 500 pages here on just like thin content, tags, stuff like that you can just reduce to, again, prioritize that crawl budget on the pages that actually matter, or whether it's actually like mistakes like broken links, error pages, things like that. Essentially, you're just reducing the overall pages on the site to pages that are actually important. That's all it is. It's just minimizing the site so the pages that actually matter definitely do get crawled. I hope that makes sense. This is absolutely a very, very technical module, and I wanted to kind of do service to both people that are beginners that have no idea what to start with, which we kind of covered in the first video, but I also wanted to cover for like you guys are a little bit more intermediate and advanced. Here's like a more detailed checklist of things to look into, how exactly to define those issues, what to do with them, everything like that. Hopefully that helps you guys out. If that is helpful, please do me a favor. Please click the like button below, as mentioned before. Just a little tap, and it absolutely helps out this channel. And aside from that, that wraps up our technical SEO module. Again, I could dive much, much deeper into this stuff, but there's a limit where it gets extremely boring, extremely difficult to follow. And I think, honestly, a lot of this is just kind of nuanced. So hopefully this is helpful, or this is like an hour-long video or something like that. With that said, in the next module, we're going to get into link building, how to build links, what they are, all that good stuff. So that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next module.